Hello, everyone, and welcome to NACTO's public webinar on Getting to Vision Zero, Rethinking Large Vehicles on City Streets. My name is Kate Salignier. I'm the Strategy Director here at NACTO, and I'm your moderator today. So for those of you who are new to NACTO, we are the National Association of City Transportation Officials. We're a coalition of over 70 city transportation departments and transit agencies across North America. Our goal is to help cities share information and best practices that can make city streets better for people, safer, more sustainable, more accessible, and provide them more transportation choices that can support a strong economy and a vibrant quality of life. Webinars like this one are key to NACTO's mission. We bring together city transportation departments, operators, advocates, and other interested parties to learn from each other and really help cities develop city-focused design standards that meet urban needs and conditions and provide a platform for leading and new voices in transportation. So some quick logistics before we get started. We're going to try to leave a segment of about 20 minutes at the end of these presentations for questions and answers, but you can start sending in your questions, honestly, as soon as they come up. So, thing two, asking questions. On your on-screen control panel, there is a question box. Please type in your questions there as soon as you think of them, and we're going to try to get through as many of them as we can in that 20-minute period. If we don't get to your question, do not worry. We will try to connect you with the speakers after so that we can get those answers to you. And also, given that this is a moderated webinar, we're going to be combining questions where appropriate, so we may not ask your exact question. Second thing, or I guess third thing, yes, we are going to be releasing the recording and the slides from this webinar on the website in the next couple of days, so you'll be able to get those after the fact. And also, yes, this webinar is available for one AICP CM credit, so feel free to log your hours once the webinar wraps up. And the last thing is that NACTO hosts webinars like this on a relatively ongoing basis. So please keep checking our website, which is nacto.org, for upcoming events and events like this. So today's webinar features an often overlooked topic in city transportation planning and policy, which is freight vehicles. We know that large vehicles are a massive presence on our streets, and we know that big trucks, fire trucks, waste management, freight and delivery all have a disproportionate impact on our city's Vision Zero, congestion, and greenhouse gas reduction goals. So to address these challenges, cities across the U.S. are exploring new ways to tackle the challenges posed by large vehicles. Today's programming will span the landscape of large vehicle solutions on city streets, from comprehensive purchasing strategies that put Vision Zero and climate emissions reductions at the core of fleet management, to pilot models for delivering freight on city streets. We're going to start off with an overview of how large vehicles impact urban safety, including an introduction to two new reports released by NACTO and the USDOT Volpe Center, titled Optimizing Large Vehicles for Urban Environments. And then we're going to zoom into specific innovations happening on the ground in two NACTO member cities, Seattle and New York, to learn about solutions that they're piloting. So we're joined by a really excellent panel of experts today. With us, we have Alex Epstein, who are going to kick off, Alex Epstein and Jonah Terenza, who are going to kick off this conversation on that Optimizing Large Vehicles for Urban Environments report. Alex is a systems analyst at the USDOT's Office of Policy Planning and Environment at the Volpe Center. And in this role, he evaluates and advises on the effectiveness, safety, and sustainability of advanced vehicle and fuel technologies, partnering with transportation leaders to improve urban traffic safety and environmental performance. He's joined by Jonah Terenza, who is a transportation planner at the Volpe Center, working with federal agencies to showcase best practices in transportation policy and project delivery across the U.S. Next, we're going to have Keith Kerman from the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, who's going to dive into our first city case study on the DCAS Fleet Transition Plan. Keith is the Deputy Commissioner at Citywide Administrative Services, and he's the city's first Chief Fleet Officer. He's an agency lead for Mayor de Blasio's Vision Zero initiative to eliminate traffic fatalities in New York, and is currently spearheading a series of safety initiatives for the city fleet. In partnership with the city's large operating agencies, such as police and sanitation, Keith also led a major effort to share services and consolidate aspects of New York City's vast fleet operations. And lastly, we have with us Chris Eves from Seattle, who's going to talk about urban goods management pilots. Chris is a PE with practice in public agencies from Texas to Nevada and now currently in Washington State. His career has ranged from fieldwork to project design, and over the last 5 years, he's managed Seattle's freight transportation program, including rail, port, and roadway modes. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Alex at the Volpe Center.
Okay, I'm switching over to the screen here. One moment.
You are good to go, Alex.
All right. The screen is showing correctly?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Kate. And I'll dive right in on our recap of these reports. First, a bit of context on the issue of large vehicles in urban environments and the safety considerations, why we convened a Vision Zero large vehicle safety working group to come up with strategies to advance this issue. And then a brief recap, I'll offer what I hope you'll see as a toolkit, and I hope we'll tease attendees into checking out the reports that we produced for NACTO and were published at the end of last year. And I'll segue over to implementation and to the following speakers with a couple of thoughts on experimenting and phasing in these large vehicle safety strategies. By way of context, heavy trucks, and these numbers are actually just for the trucks, represent about 4% of registered vehicles in the US, but large truck-involved crashes represent about 7% of vulnerable road user fatalities, so bicycles and pedestrian fatalities, a number that has been growing and hit 468 in 2016, so not including all the non-fatal serious injury crashes. And part of the issue there is that even at low speed, imagine this scenario in the photo, even at low speed, the survivability for a person outside the vehicle is very low, and indeed drivers involved in crashes with pedestrians and cyclists who are operating large vehicles often report not realizing that they had even struck a person. So clearly there is opportunity for safety improvement. One possible strategy for that is leveraging publicly owned, leased, contracted, or permitted truck fleets to improve safety for vulnerable road users relative to the large vehicles that travel on city streets. This can happen through a variety of means, through retrofitting existing vehicles, procuring new vehicles, taking advantage of city contracts or other jurisdictional contracts, and in partnership with the private sector, spurring a virtuous cycle of supply and demand of safer vehicle designs or safer vehicle technologies. Now, we thought about how do we select appropriately sized and configured heavy vehicles for urban driving? What does this mean? What could be the strategies to achieve that? And to do so, to investigate what could be a small investment, potentially a large payoff toward achieving Vision Zero goals, a large vehicle safety technology working group was assembled a couple of years ago with the cities of Boston, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle, pooling funds through NACTO and partnering with the Volpe Center here, as we're a federal lab within the U.S. Department of Transportation that is able to take on such multimodal research projects. And as an early deliverable, so as an outcome of that working group, we've produced a number of reports, as Kate mentioned. These reports break up into advanced driver assistance systems and downsizing, or what you can think of as right-sizing vehicles, so that they're more smartly designed, perhaps, for urban operation. To give you a flavor of the report, we cover a range of vehicle safety technologies, different vehicle models, what are the availability of these different technologies like pedestrian automatic emergency braking systems, or improved direct vision so that the driver can see a pedestrian through the window instead of having to rely on a camera or sensor. And we highlight things like the blind spots of different vehicle designs that you see at the bottom there. We're highlighting that existing fleets often have very different models, as you see in the photo in the middle, that have different safety profiles potentially in urban areas. And new products are coming out all the time, new types of vehicles, including some imports from Europe, as you see at the top right, things that may not have been available even 5 years ago in North America. So what do we mean by downsizing? We really mean rethinking the design of some of the large vehicles that may not be tailored to urban operation today, that may be one size fits all, perhaps, so that they travel on the interstate and then they also travel on a local street. And those changes in vehicle dimensions include things like wheelbase, which can change the turn radius that you can have on a street corner, the wheel cut, the steering axle configuration, the width, where the driver sits. Here's where the driver sits. Up high or down low? What kind of cab shape is it? Who will be seen by that driver? What kind of turn radius is possible is a large factor in determining how intersections are configured, how long crosswalks are, whether protected bike lanes can be put in. And ultimately, the driver's situational awareness, comfort and confidence in driving on city streets. We took 3 deep dives, and I don't mean to walk us through these in any detail. I just want to offer a flavor of our fire engine and fire ladder truck deep dives, where we took a look at typical North American models and representative European and Asian models of apparatus, and found ultimately that the performance can be maintained or can even be exceeded for key criteria such as how far the ladder can reach, how high the ladder can extend, while minimizing the turn radius. For example, going from 41 feet in the first column to 23 feet turn radius, going from a typical US model to a model that's used in Germany. We did the same for non-emergency vehicles, for straight trucks, and looked at how, again, capability can be maintained, and perhaps the design can be more tailored to the urban environment to be more maneuverable and to reduce potentially the risk of collisions, of crashes with vulnerable road users. So not only the way that the vehicle turns and the footprint of the vehicle, but also what the driver can see, and that's what's shown at the right there as far as transforming truck cabs from the kinds of conventional cabs that are most common today in the US to adding incremental improvements such as additional windows or more sloped cabs, more sloped hoods, I should say, or considering cab forward configurations. And ultimately, the most transformative, what we call the high vision cab solution, which may involve a low entry cab forward design with the maximum window glazing possible. And you can see the difference there between that yellow truck in the center at the bottom and the yellow truck just to the left of it, which has a conventional cab. If you step inside those two types of trucks and you look at a 6-foot pole, you can see that 6-foot pole out in front, and then you sit in the conventional cab truck and you see that 6-foot pole out quite far away. And that's how far away someone would have to be seen. So we have performed some additional work, and happy to take it in questions and answers on characterizing the blind zones and blind spots of different types of trucks. But suffice it to say that the more the truck driver can see, the more information he or she has to prevent hitting another road user, especially a vulnerable road user. In terms of taking this to implementation, I'm not going to steal New York City's thunder. I'll just say that a systematic plan, like the Safe Fleet Transition Plan, takes some of these best practices and starts to operationalize them. And since London is not presenting today, I'll mention that one of the key things to take away is that just trying some of these safer vehicle strategies can be the hardest part. And I really love what some of the findings suggested about the change in perceptions of truck drivers in London when private fleets were offered to pilot these high vision cabs. Perhaps my favorite one is at the top right. As a truck driver, it pains me to say this, but it's actually pretty good. And that's a stark change after one has just had an opportunity to feel and touch and use the object instead of being initially skeptical. So in short, right-sized vehicles for the urban environment can maintain or increase capability and potentially make a positive safety impact. If you think about emergency vehicles, reducing response time, increasing access during rush hour, increasing large vehicle access, especially in historic parts of cities, and improving roadway and operator safety. Not just the vulnerable road users, but if you think about a vehicle where a driver has to step up 1 or 2 steps versus 4 steps off the ground 100 times a day, there's a difference there in terms of ingress and egress injuries that we've seen in the labor injury data. So a few takeaways: talk to other cities, consider a combination of quick wins and being systematic when you go all in, and check out these resources. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Deputy Commissioner Keith Kerman at the City of New York Fleet. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. New York City has partnered with the Volpe Center, and it's been very productive. I want to also thank Kate and Sasha from NACTO for inviting us. It is something that we have stressed, that the vehicle itself is an important part of street and traffic design, an important part of Vision Zero. My name is Keith Kerman. I'm the Chief Fleet Officer for the City of New York, and I'm going to as quickly as we can, both our safe and clean fleet transitions. First, who we are. We are the largest municipal fleet in the United States. We're about 31,000 vehicles. In America, you can open the TV set any night and watch our vehicles crashing, rushing around. It's the New York City Police Department, the Fire Department, the Department of Sanitation. This is an all-electric GM Bolt from the Police Department. So if you come here and you cause trouble, we'll at least arrest you with 0 emissions. This is an ambulance from the Fire Department. It's actually a plug-in hybrid ambulance. You can plug that ambulance in and reduce emissions. We hope none of you get to see any of our Rikers Island correctional jail buses. Department of Sanitation is the largest public works operation in the United States. And in addition to cleaning our streets and removing our garbage, it plows our streets. The Parks Department, the largest municipal park system in the United States, and I spent much of my career there. Our Department of Transportation, which is leading so many of our Vision Zero initiatives. We have tanks. We have puppet mobiles, so I hope all of you have puppet mobiles as well. And what we're here to talk to you about are 2 plans under Mayor Bill de Blasio, who's the mayor of the City of New York, that are helping to transform our fleet. So we mentioned we have 31,000 vehicles. We have 50 agencies. We have over 160 types of vehicles. We operate just about everything from Class 1 to Class 8 to off-road that's out there in the marketplace today. So we feel as we make these transitions, and we have 80,000 vehicle operators, so we're dealing with the whole universe of people, from those who really care to those who maybe don't, and everyone in between, and every type of vehicle from the smallest to the largest and everything in between. So we think if we can make these transitions, then everyone can. So there are 2 transitional documents, and the first thing I would encourage everybody to do who cares about safe and clean fleets is to put pen to paper and develop plans, or just take ours. All of ours are public record. We're happy to share them. But first, you kind of have to make a plan. So we have 2 plans. On the safety side, what we call the Safe Fleet Transition Plan, so that we can chart out and assess technologies and make our fleet as safe as possible. And then we have the same thing on the sustainable side and the emissions side and the fueling side, what we call a Clean Fleet Transition Plan. Both of these are public record documents. I'm going to go through as quickly as I can some of the details of these, but we're happy to share them, happy to work with anyone in the United States or around the world, and we're going to talk a little bit more about our international partnerships. All right, so Alex mentioned the Safe Fleet Transition Plan, and this is the core of it. This table is the core of it. And what our idea was, having 160 different vehicle types, 50 different client agencies and business units, was that, we needed to have a formal, structured way to assess, reassess, test, and implement safety technologies as they come into the market. No one fleet, even one as large as ours, can be completely up to date on everything happening in the marketplace. It's been a very dynamic marketplace on sustainable technologies and safe technologies, or necessarily understand what works and what doesn't. Not everything put in the marketplace is worth investing in or is going to have a true return on investment, either at a cost or safety level. So we wanted to have a formal program of developing these options, implementing these options, testing these options, and then reassessing it all. In fact, we did the initial plan 2 years ago, and we did a formal public announcement of our first reassessment just a couple months ago. So the different tiers, tier 1 is what we mandate. Tier 1 is what we think has a return on investment, is a proven technology, we should be doing it, and everybody has to have this in their specifications unless they get a very particular exemption that I sign for a really good reason. So for that, those are things like high vision trucks, which Alex talked about, which we are now implementing. Side guards, truck side guards, and interestingly enough, high vision trucks and truck side guards, since this is both a U.S. and international audience, are much more along the way in Europe and around the world than they are in the States, where they're fairly new and very aggressive technologies. We've learned from our international partners. We also are mandating telematics for all city vehicles, and we're sitting now from what basically a fleet command center to now be able to monitor the operations of city vehicles. We're mandating for light duty vehicles automatic braking, and so that we can address the single biggest cause of collisions that we know, which is rear-ending. 50% of our collisions, we're just not paying attention. We crash the vehicle in front of us, an enormous fiscal and safety cost. And so those are our mandates. But then we have tier 2 are best practices, innovations that we think are, very, very aggressive and things we may want to eventually mandate, but we're not ready to do that. So while we love automatic braking for light duty vehicles, it's clearly not there as a technology yet for medium and heavy duty trucks. We're out there trying to test it and pilot and partner. We want it to be there, but it's not there yet. We're interested in things like speed governors, but we're not comfortable yet whether we can implement that as a mandate. And then these other technologies that we're working on, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure. Then we have the exploratory technologies, tier 3. These are things that, are coming down the road. We're interested in them. We're studying. We're talking to vendors about them, but we're not ready to, in our world, to mandate them. So universal design, looking at how we design sitting areas in trucks and vehicles for all types of people, tall, short, and everything in between. Surround cameras. We have not, some of you may have implemented things like alcohol touch ignition, but as a fleet, we haven't touched that yet. So we're going to go really quickly through some of the specific things that we've done, but the most important thing that we want to share is having a structure to formally assess, reassess, and understand these developments in safety as we go along. There are changes happening very quick, and no fleet should be on their own. We're here to partner with everyone and to really try and transition these in a thoughtful way, using known technologies first, where you're going to get the safety reductions, you're going to get the cost reductions, and then moving forward. We have already in 2 years implemented over 25,000 new safety features in our fleet through our buying programs, through this initiative. So we are doing this in scale, and this is a quick chart of just the different things we're putting in place. Side guards, again, if you're in Europe, this is old news, but if you're in America, there are not that many of these. These are what are those? And so we really think that the time has come for all trucks in the United States to have side guards. It's a basic common sense fix. No one should be getting trapped behind the back of a wheel. It doesn't take an operator to do anything different. We already see the costs going down. High vision truck cabs, we are convinced that it's time to get away from what we call the conventional truck. You see that, the orange in the middle, and get to high vision to reduce the line of sight. We have had as a fleet tragic events involving line of sight where we have literally run over people in public spaces, and everyone wondered, how could you do it? How could you do it? The answer is because the driver can't see for 20 feet in front of them. And so we think this really makes sense, and we're trying to help move the industry on this. Telematics, we think the time has come for telematics, that there's a return on investment. We are now tracking live all our vehicles. We can monitor speeding, hard braking. We have automatic collision alerts. If a city fleet vehicle gets into a collision, we get not just an email alert instantly that G-force event has happened. We get an immediate report. We already have our first report within seconds of these events. And this can help not just on safety and prevention, but on addressing litigation costs and claims costs, which in our world, if you know New York, is a really big cost. Too many people in this audience for me to admit just how big, but in the hundreds of millions. And this is our new Office of Real-Time Tracking. We have a fleet command center operating 7 days a week to monitor fleet operations. We're getting new safety scorecards and new information that we never got before to help agencies understand the safety behaviors of individual vehicles, drivers, and their fleets. We still are training people. We call in every driver. We have 80,000 drivers, every driver on the civilian side, and then separately for the uniform side. So we've already trained over 51,000 civilians for driving, but we also do that on the uniform side. We survey our operators. We need to hear from our operators, and so we are doing formal surveys of what their priorities are and what they're thinking about what we're doing. We're tracking crashes in new ways. I mentioned that we now know rear ends are our biggest problem. We have a system called Crash. We are doing some innovations on safety, and while I have limited time, and I'm gonna stop on time, we do not believe that hands-free cell phone use is safe. In the United States, we banned texting and we banned handheld cell phone use, but then everybody said, oh, it's okay to have a hands-free. We think the distraction is the issue. I'm talking to all of you now on this webinar and happy to be doing so. What I am not doing is driving a vehicle in crowded New York streets, but it would be perfectly legal for me to do so. To pause, go in a car, and continue this webinar while driving is legal, but it's crazy. We know we're making progress. We are reducing collisions per mile, reducing fatalities. We know these steps make sense. We're also partnering around the country and around the world. In June, we're going to be having an international partnership, an international fleet forum in Montreal. We just finished one in London. We've done a lot of great work with London, so we invite all of you to participate. We have our annual fleet show at Flushing Meadow Park, where the US Open tennis is every year on May 16th. So we'd love to, we'll email you all and get you involved. We're trying to do the same on clean fleet. So I have a couple minutes, so I'm going to go quickly. But the same transition we're trying to do in safety, we want to do in sustainability. So really quickly, we have the same kind of transition plan that is online that we can share with you. We are installing electric cars. We have as many electric cars as anyone. Our mayor is now in a plug-in minivan. We're putting chargers all over the city of New York, fast chargers, solar carports. We are training our operators and mechanics, because this is, something you really have to transition, including with your mechanical staff and your operators, to understand the technology. We're putting in these great solar carports at the public schools. If you want an example of zero emissions at the car, zero emissions in the production of energy, distributed non-grid future transport, you're looking at it in that slide. Solar carports not tied to the grid. They can take care of about 2 to 3 electric cars, zero emissions at every side, completely distributed, independent fueling and powering. We achieved 100 miles per gallon in our CAFE standard reporting, which is legal reporting for our fleet, in fiscal year 18. So as America debates whether 54.5 by 2024 is doable, we are already doing 100, and we don't get specially designed vehicles. We buy from GM, Ford, Toyota, and regular manufacturers out of dealerships. Well, there's no question that these things can be done. I'm going to move a little quickly. We're also seeing the same fuel economy benefits in our actual use of vehicles with all our, with heat and AC and idling. Plus, we operate a massive 15,000 unit off-road equipment program. So we have to factor that fuel use into our emissions. The police department is getting in the act. We are introducing our first hybrid police cars. We'll have 200 hybrid police sedans coming in by June, as well as working on a utility contract for policing and hybrids. I mentioned our ambulances are hybrid and plug-in ambulances. When we started doing alternative fuel vehicles in 2000, we had 2 models. We now have 38 models. We're seeing this market develop. They wrote a movie, Who Killed the Electric Car, 14 years ago. That movie was premature. We, of course, know, and even the federal government still publishes in the United States, how inefficient the combustion gas engine is. You're really wasting most of the fuel you put into a regular car. Finally, we are looking on trucking to transition completely to biofuels. We already have been using biodiesel for about 15 years. We're now moving to something called renewable diesel, trying to get out of diesel fuel completely in the marketplace. And we can talk more about that or advise you more about that. We're even putting and testing soybean and soy oil in our tires. We're using car share and fleet share so that we optimize the use of city vehicles. So the final thing I want to leave you with and is that on one hand, New York City has spent a lot of money in these safe and sustainable technologies. And we can. We're a big place. We're the 5th largest government in the United States. We've spent up to $1.5 billion on sustainable approaches. In that sense, that's great. However, it's also a return on investment program. In fact, everything we do on safety and sustainability is actually being implemented into the New York City budget as a savings initiative. So we have this new command center for vehicles, but we actually must achieve reductions in collision costs to fund it. We're actually funded on reductions in collision costs. When we bring in electric vehicles, OMB is taking the maintenance and fuel budgets away from agencies, since we should be saving on maintenance and fuel. So what's interesting is while we're in a position as a large municipal entity to make these investments, and we want to work with all of you to make these investments, we're also trying to make sure these are sustainable investments, and in fact, trying to reduce costs through these investments. With that, I just want to thank all of you for participating in this call. It's been a great opportunity to talk to you about these things that we think are so important. And I want to introduce Chris Eves from the city of Seattle.
Well, great. Thank you very much. Let me set myself up also. And I think, whoops. Well, one of the things I'd like to do is actually thank both Keith and Alex. They talked about access in terms of trucks and also about testing and assessing. Those are some of the biggest things that we want to do as we work into some of the pilot projects that I'm talking about. And in fact, as an overview, what we've really been trying to take care of is understand the concept that, yes, we're designing to people, but some of these people are in trucks. And just as been talked about earlier, we want to improve visibility and improve safety, but also access. We know that people aren't perfect, and as we look at this, we're working to meet our partner, and that means business needs. We have a lot of similar goals. As a functioning network, we would like to have destination access be maximized. But for deliveries, as an example, the trip is affected by how much time you are at a destination. And effectively, you have time on the network and time at the curb becoming influences to what trucks do, what delivery drivers do, and how they perform. So what we really wanted to do, and I'm not going to worry about reading out lists on screens, is initially we wanted to get our baseline data. We wanted to get information on what we're calling the final 50 feet and began to realize that we were blurring the line between public and private realms, and we're learning that what happened inside a building was effectively as or more important as what was going on outside. Because the more time you spent in a building, the more time you were dwelling in a load zone, and the less opportunity some other delivery driver had to perform their own necessary functions to keep businesses, people, and goods moving. So pulling in this information, we took everything, distilled it, put it all together, and actually ended up realizing that we could now tell you relatively how easy or difficult it was to get to a certain location. We were even able to break it down building by building. That's the map, and certainly I'm not going to expect you to see all our street names. they aren't there. And so ultimately, what we ended up finding too was that there are a lot of what we're calling different flavors of freight. Parcel delivery, food, dry goods, even construction is its own form of delivery. But we also had to realize that service vehicles operate as commercial vehicles. We have large loads like AC units, especially into downtown, as maintenance, and we can't forget that we also have reverse logistics, which is effectively garbage and utilities. And that's just in the downtown. So as we began to understand what was happening, we also began to see all the gradations of what was going on. Once we began to realize that, we began to figure out that we needed to start looking for some type of answers. And one of the big goals was to find a way to make things scalable. We didn't want to test something out and find only that it worked on one block in our city only. That was nice, and it certainly helped us. But we wanted to be able to come back, assess, and test. And working with the University of Washington and their urban freight lab has helped us get a really great third-party and unbiased view of what has been going on. One of the items that we put together, and we actually tested in our own municipal building, was a common carrier pilot. That was effectively a locker that any delivery company could deliver to and use to access. Proof of concept, we ended up with a 78% reduction in dwell time, meaning that our parking zones, our load zones, turned over that much faster. We're certainly looking to apply this in other locations, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Some of the other things that we have performed, this is relatively speaking a flexible curb concept. We've been doing that for years, and our curb space management group really has pulled a great deal of data together. And what they did was effectively find zones where in that previous map we had more difficulty getting deliveries completed, and began to take morning truck only delivery in certain locations, and then they would transition that into parking in the afternoon. We're still in the middle of this pilot, and there's some evaluation to do, but we're supporting a lot of construction that we're calling the Seattle Squeeze. A lot of our roadways are changing and began so in the last 2 or 3 years, well, I mean, last couple of months, and will do so for the next 2 or 3 years. One of the other ones, and we're actually having a really nice time with this one, is a partnership with with UPS as an E-Trike Pilot. These have been occurring sporadically throughout the U.S., and what we're doing right now with them is testing a modular system. So the bike that you see is actually able to trade out the back box for a different and loaded set of packages. A lot of the benefit that we get out of this is that we have one truck show up at a location, and for the rest of the day, the bike is taking the place of the truck. Estimates right now, we're saving about 25 miles worth of truck movement within a very narrow area, just a few blocks, maybe 4 by 6 blocks. And that obviously improves safety. Certainly that's highly visible. And we've had a really great set of interaction. It's certainly working for us in a dense environment. And honestly, in that image, that was taken by a professional photographer. UPS is really happy with the work they're doing. And people were so interested in it, they were trying to take selfies and were getting in the way of the photographer. They finally had to agree that if they would let the photographer finish their work, the people could come and take pictures too. So obviously there's a public interest in this, and we're certainly looking forward to getting our information. Again, we're using the University of Washington's Urban Freight Lab to be a third-party vendor for information. And in terms of what we were doing and how we wanted to take the project, UPS is interested in density for delivery, but a very large building really does need a truck to take all the package delivery needs. Out in the suburban area, homes may be too far apart to allow a bicycle to do anything in a timely manner. So kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we needed something not too big, not too little. We ourselves wanted to find a location where the trailer I was talking about didn't affect adjacent properties. Certainly, there are other businesses going on, and we wanted to be sure that wherever we were also making a general benefit to the network, keeping in mind that there is no one mode occurring in a location anymore. Frankly, there never was. As we went through this, we also did make sure we had a process ahead of time. UPS certainly had a business case to review. They wanted to make sure that this was at least revenue neutral for them. It did, of course, also work to take emissions out of the air, reduce vehicle impacts into our network, and as a result, we started looking for and identified areas, finally did field reviews, and made sure that what they were looking for and what we were looking for matched. And again, this comes back to we have similar interests, but really need to communicate what our overall goals are. At this point in time, as I mentioned before, the Urban Freight Lab is performing review on the data. UPS is providing information that they don't normally provide, and they're doing this to the university. The USDOT staff will be reviewing the outcomes, and there's a reason behind this. As a public agency, a lot of our information can be publicly disclosed, and that can make businesses nervous. So what we've done is we have used the UW as a trusted third-party information broker. It's taking shameless advantage of them, and certainly I've made the poor university students work many more hours than I think they thought they would. But the end result is that we have an opportunity to work with people more closely than we previously had. And it's really become a positive for us when we're doing relationship building. So, really quick information. One of the items that we looked at, certainly because we're a public agency and we don't want a private benefit of public funds, is we ended up having to make sure that this wasn't some type of advertisement overall, that we were not just simply touting one company over another. So the pilot is open to others. Right now we haven't had a second reply or another person making the request, but that is certainly available as we come into, I think, the 4th month of our pilot. It's about a year long. Another part that we realized is that parking enforcement was a big deal. We had to make sure that the area designated for this pilot project, it too is a flex area where in the day it's here for the UPS, at night it's for general parking, was clear. Public perception, as I mentioned earlier, we were 99% great responses. We had people though asking questions about, are the bikes going to be allowed to drive on the sidewalk? How fast are they allowed to go? What are the issues? And we answered those questions and made sure that not only that we were responding, but that UPS clearly expressed that their goal was about safety. It was about better movement as well as being a good neighbor. And so the communication and the presentation and being able to talk to your partners was a really big deal and continues to be. As this goes on, I think we're finishing this in October, and I will be looking forward to the university's results and outcomes. Our next item, the DOE Grant, I purposely put the full name of the grant up there, which is the Technology Integration to Gain Commercial Efficiency for the Urban Goods Delivery System, meet future demand to city passenger delivery load and unload spaces and reduce energy consumption. We call it the grant. The big deal for us is we were trying to find ways to reduce the parking seeking. All of the activities that we have realized are going on that help that more fully congest our network without us meaning to. We realize too that private partners like turnaround, they want to reduce dwell times at commercial zones, and so we're trying to find the technology for detection that may allow people eventually to reserve locations both in a public and potentially a private loading bay so that we can begin to use resources that we don't normally have access to. Ultimately, too, we use a vehicle or a commercial vehicle permit system, and in that, we're sometimes a little bit unique. Not every city does this. And we're trying to upgrade the system. We're trying to make sure that we have better information and that we actually serve this section or this mode more completely. The better information they have, the better they operate, and the fewer lane miles they use, as well as the fewer turns and potential collision points they have. So where we are right now with this, we're identifying locations, we're having regular meetings with the University of Washington, who is actually the lead on the grant. And I need to make sure that you know, too, that our curb space management group is also taking lead for the SDOT side. They are the ones who, exactly as the name implies, they're taking care of the parking, they're understanding our own inventory and trying to maximize its use. One of the other portions of this grant is to attempt to further the proof of concept that we talked about earlier in terms of common carrier lockers. With any opportunity that we can find, we're going to try and, well, for lack of a better word, exploit this. One of the options may well be in our transit hubs, and so we're wanting to figure out what we can do and how we can do that. And all of this we're trying to put together something that right now we're trying to consider the future 50. Building design, which buildings don't turn around in a couple of years in terms of inventory. They're 50 to 100 years. The vehicle load zone, private access bays, alleys, and how the buildings work internally. We're looking at our operations, and we're looking at policy to support these. So in terms of all our pilot projects, we want them to be scalable, we want them to be informed, and we do want to test and assess. And I really do want to finish on that because that's a really important point for all of the work that I think we do and should do. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to turn it over for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you to all three of you. Those were really some fantastic presentations. We are a little over time, so we're going to get to a couple fewer questions than we had hoped. But I wanted to just remind folks that our fantastic presenters have generously offered to answer questions after the fact. So go ahead and type in your questions. We'll get to one or two of them, but we'll also try to get answers after the fact from our great presenters. So I want to start us off with a question that's really kind of directed toward Keith and Chris. So what do you know now about creating these fleet transition plans, or creating pilot programming that you wish you'd known when you started? What would you advise other cities to do if they're looking to really systematically change their fleets to support Vision Zero or greenhouse gas emissions reduction programming? What are some of the specific steps that you would suggest that they start with?
Okay, this is Keith. It's trickier. I'll start with Keith, and then I'll transfer it over to Chris. So one, I do think, like I mentioned, that it's helpful to have a formal plan or process, a set of goals that you put out there and that you can share across your clients, so that, number one, the users understand what you're trying to do and that they have the ability to participate. One reality is, as a fleet manager, while we're doing all this kind of effort in sustainability and safety, my day job is still to make sure that we offer vehicles that are reliable and perform the basic public purposes of security and emergency response and cleaning. So, we can't sacrifice core operations to do good stuff in safety and sustainability. So I do think it is a great idea to make sure that you have kind of a formal plan, that you have high-level leadership, and that you set out kind of goals up front, and that you have a process for introducing technologies, evaluating technologies. We do presentations from vendors in our every interagency meeting, so our clients can kind of start to see the technologies developing. We test technologies. We do introductions with, certain agencies and certain first adopters first. So you got to have a process. You shouldn't, what I sometimes refer to as ham and egg it. You shouldn't just kind of casually be doing this. You should have a formal process.
Well, this is Chris. I'm just going to actually support exactly what he said. We have a freight master plan. We're really organized towards that. Some of the work we do discusses developing an urban goods delivery strategy. And absolutely, we review technology. We work with the university on this. And for us too, what we have found as we moved into pilot projects is having an unbiased third party or outside reviewer. Everybody can find a way to succeed if they create their own report. We like using somebody else to make sure that we also see where we could improve. In terms of what we do, we consider it a lab, and things that aren't successful, or let us say actual failures, still teach us something.
Great, fantastic. Our next question for both of you is if you could talk a little bit more about the processes that you guys have for sort of testing out these new ideas and technologies. How do you go from idea to deciding that something like a high vision cab or side guards or e-trike deliveries makes sense? How do you go from the idea to reality?
This is Keith, so I guess we'll just keep it in the order. So one, a few things. First off, we do a lot of market testing. So we have our annual fleet show where hundreds of vendors come and present. Like I mentioned, we are always bringing our clients, the vehicle users, into presentations with vendors. So number one, you got to kind of do your market research. Everyone, not just fleet management, but your user clients have to understand where the market's going, be exposed to that. Two, we do either demonstration projects or vehicle tests all the time. So we're currently bidding a major renewable diesel contract to try and transition all our diesel fuel from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel. But first, we did something called a demonstration project last year, 1 million gallons of using renewable diesel under the city's very formal demonstration project rules, where you have to do this whole report and analysis. So we did a formal demonstration and tested it out over a year, and really a year and a half of work, before we now made a policy decision to do a formal long-term contract. Then the third thing I'll say is always look for your early adopters. There's a reason that our biodiesel programs, our hybrid programs, and our electric vehicle programs all launched first at the New York City Parks and Recreation Department, an agency who sees environmental stewardship as its core mission, and where, people go to Central Park really don't want to interact with some gas Parks Department vehicle spewing emissions, right? They go to Central Park to get away from the emissions of the city, not to rediscover them. So find your early adopters. They're the ones who are going to enthusiastically first implement these technologies, give you a fair hearing and understanding of what works and doesn't work.
Well, actually, it's somewhat similar here too. We also try very hard to present anything that we do in terms of pilot projects as something that's scalable, something that could be applied generally rather than specifically. Quite honestly too, early adopters getting information from other jurisdictions is wonderful. I kind of call it shameless theft. And in our own side, we want to deal with, because I'm an engineer type, we worked on time and motion studies, finding where we can improve efficiencies. And what we try and do, again, is make sure that we have very good general results and an underpinning of data so that we can build on this or somebody else's information to come up to conclusions and outcomes.
Great. So our last question, and again, we'll try to get your answers to all the other great questions that you've asked after this webinar. But where do you guys see, when you're talking about safety or greenhouse gas emissions reductions, where do you see sort of bigger policy solutions, off-hours delivery, congestion pricing? Where do those fit into this conversation? Or are there other policies or legislations that cities should be considering and pushing?
Okay, so Look, big policy matters enormously. In a couple of the slides, and I had to go through them quickly, but New York City Fleet, as a fleet operation, has been weighing in publicly on federal policy, probably for the first time that our fleet operation, or many, have decided we needed to do that, right? So we know that the CAFE standards are achievable at 54.5. Why do we know that? Because we already achieve 100 and we buy from dealerships. So we want to make sure that CAFE standards don't go backwards, because that matters. We know that electric and hybrid vehicles are viable vehicles and that this market can further develop. Why do we know that? Because in 2000, there were only 2 alternative fuel vehicle models that we had access to, and now we've got nearly 40, and we're seeing advances every day. That happened through federal policy. We know that. We know that the support of the previous federal administration helped make that happen. Biofuel policy, right? So we're trying to use renewable diesel. Why is renewable diesel mostly sold in California today? Because they have a low carbon fuel standards from the state that incentivizes it. One of the big issues for biodiesel are also federal policy on the biodiesel tax credit and the renewable fuel standard. So we're under no illusion. Federal and state policy has enormous impact on what we can do. We don't design vehicles. We don't design fuels. We need to go to the marketplace, and the marketplace incentives, we're big, but we're not that big. And no one's going to design a vehicle just for us or design a fuel just for us. So we need the marketplace to continue in the sustainable direction, and state and federal public policy. Obviously, we don't have time to go through the details of all the different aspects of it, but it's incredibly important.
And so I'll focus on, I guess, the local policies, and in response to things like off hours or cordons, frankly, the answer is all of them. Off hours delivery can work for some things, but it's not going to work for the plumber who needs to fix your leak. It certainly doesn't work for having garbage come in at 2 in the morning and pick up a giant metal canister. So we need to understand, one, what we're up to, discover what type of deliveries we need where we can influence ourselves. And I'm looking again at the local level, because I think right now we've talked great at the federal and state, and I completely agree with those. And we get to evaluate our actions. We get to understand where we can make influence. My best example is for food. You can do nighttime delivery, but only if the restaurant's willing to receive it. And you need to educate chef who demands he needs to see the cheese when it comes in, that he has opportunities to return items very quickly and easily. And there's a business angle for that. But we need to be able to inform the people of the options as well as get them to accept them. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, guys. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this webinar. I just want to flag that we've got a couple of other exciting things coming up. First being the NACTO Designing Cities Conference in Toronto in September. So check out the website. Registration is opening soon. We hope to see you all there. Also wanted to flag that we are doing many more webinars like this on this and other topics. So check out our website to see those. And if you have ideas on things that you would like to hear about, or things, honestly, you would like to talk about, send us an email to events@nacto.org, and we will, see how we can fit them into the roster. And again, a huge thank you, virtual round of applause to our fantastic presenters. That was some really great stuff, and I think a really valuable conversation. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are.